Good afternoon, and for those who have just joined us, welcome to the Leadership and Multifaith Program, or LAMP, Symposium on Asylum, Refuge, and Relocation. I'm Deanna, and I'm the Director of LAMP and a faculty member at Kayongo. And we're delighted to have you with us for this keynote session. Our speaker for this afternoon, Derreck Kayongo, was born in Kampala, Uganda, just before General Idi Amin seized power in a military coup. As violence spread through the country under the brutal regime and civil war erupted, Kayongo and his family became refugees in Kenya. He later immigrated to the United States, where he graduated from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University, and then later founded the Global Project. Today, Kayongo is a successful entrepreneur and human rights innovator, and he is also serving as the Chief Executive Officer for the National Center for Civil and Human Rights in Atlanta. His talk for this afternoon is entitled, How the Legal Power of Protecting Rights Expands the Marketplace. Our respondent and discussion facilitator for this session is Silas Allard, the Associate Director and Harold J. Berman Fellow in Law and Religion at the Center for the Study of Law and Religion at Emory University. Allard's research focuses on the ethics of migration policy. Allard is a member of the advisory committee of the Georgia Immigration Working Group and the facilitator of the detention subgroup. He also serves on the advisory group for the El Refugio Hospitality House in Lumpkin, Georgia. Allard earned his Juris Doctor and Master of Theological Studies from Emory University and clerked for Chief Judge Donald C. Pogue on the Court of International Trade following law school. Please join me now in welcoming our keynote speaker, Derreck Kayongo, and afterwards Silas Allard will lead us in the response and Q&A session.
Good afternoon, everyone. You better wake up. This is the most exciting part of the day, okay? So you gotta wake up. We're gonna have fun. I'm gonna do a couple of things. I've told I have about 4 hours to speak to you because I'm African. We don't do very well with time. That'll be one of our subject matter, I guess. No, seriously, I'm gonna tell you a little bit about my story, and I see a lot of good friends here, Elise, who haven't seen in almost 15 years, 20 years. No, stop it. Tom here and everybody here. Then after that, we'll do our little respondent, maybe some Q&A. If you're lucky, I will probably sing an African song just to calm all of our spirits down. In 1979, my parents and I woke up to an incredible experience. We had gunshots out of the apartment that we lived in, and my father looked out of the apartment and saw a soldier wielding an AK-47. In Swahili, which is an amalgam of Bantu languages and Arabic, he said the following: "Get out of your apartments right now, get out." And my father knew immediately that we were in trouble. So he said, let's get out, because if we don't go out, he's going to come in and kill us. So we get out of the apartment and we are hauled off to this roundabout station, where we find the whole village had been brought to that roundabout station. And he goes to a rostrum like that and he says, using a bullhorn, loudly, he says, "Last night 2 of my soldiers were killed and I'm here to find out who did it. So we're going to have a firing squad until you tell me what happened." A firing squad. We were aghast at this particular accusation because in any civilized society, if you have a crime like that happening, you investigate, you figure out what happened through policing. He didn't do that. So he pointed people out at random, 1, 2, 3, 4, come up. And he brought those 4 up. We were wondering what's going on, and he pulled out his pistol. He asked the question again. To no avail, 4 bullets rang out. And he shot all 4 of them at once. The cacophony that ensued after that was unbelievable, as mothers held on to their kids, crying and screaming. And he yelled out, "Be quiet. We're going to do this all day." He pointed out another 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And as he pointed at those 4, neighbors had to point at each other, saying he had pointed at you. Can you imagine your neighbor right now pointing at you, saying you had committed a crime of that nature? So he brings up those 4 against their will. He asks the question again to no avail. 4 bullets ring out again. That was 8. Before he could pick up another 4, a young man rose up his hand and said he had committed the crime. We knew he was lying because he was a visitor in the village. So they bring the young man up to the front. And as I closed my eyes at the age of 10, a bullet rings out. And I look at this young man drop dead. That, for me, began an incredible story and journey. Uganda, from where I'm from, which is a small little country the size of Oregon, beautiful country, are the source of the Nile because we think we are the source of the Nile. The Ethiopians think they're the source of the Nile because we have the White Nile and the Blue Nile. But they're not here giving the talk, so we are the source of the Nile. We came out of independence from the British thinking that this is a country we're going to lead and do very well. My parents were teachers, and they knew they were going to do very well, but teaching doesn't pay very well, so I saw them turn themselves into entrepreneurs right before my eyes. And they built 2 businesses that were very robust and very good. And I grew up in private schools. I went to British little schools. I was very, very spoiled. And everything was fantastic. And on that day, my life changed as I watched adults fight over stupid things like tribal, like religion, resources, stupid things. Whose God is bigger than whose? I saw Idi Amin, whose son sat next to me in class, Adam. See, his father changed the whole makeup of the country. I saw him change Friday into Saturday because he wanted to go to the mosque. Even the people in his own religion didn't agree with him because he did it what? With fiat. And so we became refugees and left Uganda to become refugees in Kenya, where I grew up. And a wonderful young lady called Marge Campbell from Pittsburgh. If you've never met women from Pittsburgh, you should meet them. They're crazy. But Marge taught me how to drink iced tea and all that crazy stuff that Americans do. And loved Marge, and I got to learn about American culture, and I got a chance to come to go to school here, and everything changed. But I want to tell you that story as a baseline for our conversation today, because you're looking at somebody who has been able to change that particular horrible situation and turn it into a good situation. But not all refugees are able to do that, am I right? And you know what happened for me? People gave me a chance. In fact, the US gave me a chance. If I had never been given a chance in the US, I would have never built the Global South Project. I would have never worked for Amnesty International. I would have never worked for the American Friends Service Committee. I would have never gotten the education that I got from Tufts. All that would have never happened. But most important of all, you would have never had a young Ugandan come and actually justify the fight for civil rights by him becoming the CEO for the Center for Civil and Human Rights. What a miracle that is. So, legally speaking, this is what happens. When refugees are not given a chance, you're taking away a whole piece of the marketplace that actually could be very, very substantively contributive. Because who are refugees? Are they just like animals running around with no skills? Even animals, as my dad, before I came here, I said, Dad, are we animals? He says, even animals have skills. So we are the only group of people on God's planet that have decided that we can actually tolerate these things. You will never find a lion that is a refugee somewhere, or a dolphin that has no home. Why is it that human beings are relentless on this subject of marginalizing ourselves? So how does that work? So let's look at the marketplace. When we left, my father and I, when we left Uganda and moved into Kenya, Kenya benefited quite a bit from the refugee from Uganda because we were teachers, doctors. All of a sudden, Kenya's economy ballooned and became very powerful. But Amin didn't stop there. He kicked out who? The Indian community. For those of you who know Mike Patel here, who is one of the largest owners of hotels, he's from my village in Uganda. So Mike and I left Uganda at the same time, Mike comes to the US with $400 and builds a what? A whole chain of business. Uganda would have benefited from that. But how is that different from the Jewish community? How many of you know how much did Germany lose by killing 6 million people? Forget about the labels, yeah? Can we put the labels aside? But you take 6 million people and kill them. What were they? They were doctors, lawyers, artists. Where does the marketplace replace that? Because do you know how long it takes to train expertise? And so as the marketplace struggles with these 4 factors of production, which is one of them is labor, am I right? Which doesn't move freely, it is not the most well efficiently used. Labor is always constantly being struggled around as a factor of production. So when we look at discrimination for refugees or discrimination for even our entire populations here of African Americans or women, I'm telling you, the marketplace is unhealthy. If you think we've built something here, we haven't even touched a small portion of how talented human beings are. Because we are caught in these supercilious compunctions around who we are and what our participations are. The most illogical discrimination for me is pigmentation. Because pigmentation is not a brain organ. You can't be superior by being what? Lighter than the other person. You can't. I want to close with a couple of things. I have just gotten off a phone with my brother. We have lost a friend today who had sickle cells from Uganda, moved to England, went to King's College to study law. And he was so sick at one point, he had to go to hospital, and the doctor comes up to him and says, you can't take your final exam. He says, no, I want to take it. He said, no, and you know what? You're from Africa. We don't think you're up to the task of doing the exam in hospital, but plus also you're from Africa. And he said, no, I want to do the exam. So he took the exam and he topped the class while in hospital. And the professor came back to him and said, well, I'm so sorry. I thought you were. He said, no, the law is the law. But how is that different from myself? The first time I landed at school, I had never used a computer before. So my first exam, my professor gave me an F because I wrote everything by hand. I said, what, did you read the paper? He said, no, you have to type things. He didn't care to learn my story before he gave me the grade. And that's what we do. So legal instruments cannot be used to judge people based on where they're from, color, and all that stuff. That's number one. Number two, legal instruments tend to be weak because not everybody's afforded them in an equitable fashion. In fact, when I worked at Amnesty International, one of the things we challenged around the death penalty, we talked about this earlier on, that my job at Amnesty International was to figure out, was everybody on death row in the US guilty? Because what is wrong with the death penalty? As we talked about in Europe, Europeans stopped the death penalty because, evidence is funny. The collection of evidence is tricky. And so if you're telling somebody, today is your last day on earth because we think John said you're guilty, are we sure John really knows what he's talking about? And it turned out that a small portion of people on death row in the US were actually not guilty. And what happened there was DNA. So in the same way, when you say to refugees or people seeking asylum, yes, some of them can be, funny people. Let's face it, yeah? Not every refugee is innocent and nice and good. But you could say that of some Americans, yeah? Not every American is living a perfect life. Are we kicking them out of the country? No, we can try them. But this idea of returning people to circumstances that they're running away from, this lack of empathy and sympathy, it speaks volumes about us as human beings. Then the last point here is the center. The Center for Civil and Human Rights is not here as just a theatrical piece or a conversation piece in Atlanta. It's here to remind us from whence we've come. your story as Americans and my story as an African, and how our stories sort of work together and weave together this incredible pattern of social justice. And if we don't use it to borrow from its history, its collection, to inform our current situation, then we are going to make the same mistakes that we made before. And that's my fear. And one of the ways we make those mistakes is because we use things like religion, for example, to justify evil, which is very interesting to me. Yeah? Because really, if God has this kind of power to say that women are not equal to men, then he must have made a mistake somewhere in the creation piece. If God thinks that a Brazilian is different from an Irish person, he made a mistake. Then he is complicit. God is complicit. That means God is so wrong, we all shouldn't be here. But is that what really we're talking about? Or is it that we have given into our own vices and allowed these vices to corrupt the law, which we've worked so hard to create? The civil rights movement has helped all of us create legal instruments that protect all of us. So when I go to the Center for Civil and Human Rights and look at the march in Washington, I don't see plaques that say, we black people want to be black. No, it says we need jobs, we need what? Healthcare, we need schools. And that is for everyone. So my sense therefore, as a former refugee who was given a chance to come to the US, I went to school. I'm raising you now a child in Kevin Kayongo and Lauren Kayongo who don't think they're Ugandans at all. They think they're Americans. They were born at Northside. And they always tease me. They're the worst stereotype people you can ever find. They're like, every time I say, let's have African meal. They say, what are we eating? Elephant today? But they're the worst. As we joke around with each other, they're now starting to fear the conversation in the country. My son has never worried about being an American. This is the first time he's asking that question. Dad, am I an American? I said, yeah, you are. You're from Northside. You always tell me that. He said, but I saw on TV somebody saying that, you're going to go back home. I said, well, who's going back home? Me? He's like, yeah, you're not American. I said, Kevin, I became naturalized. He said, I don't know. He put doubt in me. Naturalized citizen. So when we start to poke holes in judicial systems that we've already settled as case, and we retry these cases and start to scare everybody, what does that do to the market? It goes down. So I wanted to just come and say to you that if you've been out there wondering the power of this country, don't wonder. America is strong. We shall be fine. You know why? Because you're here today. If I walked into this room and there was nobody in the room, I would be very worried. But you're here, and you are the ones who make this country what it is. So by you not giving up these legal instruments and trying the case as it's supposed to be tried, you will make the marketplace relevant and the ability for us to actually create a perfect union, which is what this country is all about. That's what Ellis Island was all about. Ellis Island is not about you being superior over another American. It's about you being equal to every American in terms of how you are assessed, how you're deliberated, how you're given an opportunity. All those things are supposed to mean Ellis Island. Ellis Island is not about who owns this place better than the other person. And so the Center for Civil and Human Rights for me is a boon for us as people in Atlanta, especially because this is where the civil rights movement began, am I right? And therefore everybody else in the country can then benefit from this particular place. So stay hopeful. Stay hopeful. I did, as a former refugee, when Idi Amin was wrecking the country, I stayed hopeful. If you're a woman, stay hopeful. and rise up and fight for this particular space. If you're a white person, stay hopeful and rise up and fight for that political. If you're black, if you're Muslim, if you're Catholic, rise up. Because when you stop doing that, then this doesn't make sense. And I don't want you not to do that, because I'm not going to be a refugee again. This is it. It stops right here. Like, I'm not going to another country. This is it. So if you guys don't fight for me and I don't fight for you, where are we going to go? Like, where? You want to go to Uganda with me? Is that what you're looking at? It's not going to work out, you know? So as I bring my colleague to have this particular discourse around the other pieces, I want to let you know that the reason why I'm so proud of this country is I can go to any part of this country, and hear a bad story that turned out well. From the Japanese internment camp to now one of my friends who's Japanese American, so proud to be an American. To an African American who, my God, slavery? But who's now just so well. We have poets here. From my Jewish friend who, I told a story about my dad's best friend who was Jewish, who was killed by Idi Amin. But they're here. And you tell me America is not strong? No, we are strong. And we will remain strong. So this marketplace will continue to be strong because we are diverse. We understand diversity. We have this conversation every day, more than any other country in the world. We have diversity conversations. We fight through them. We yell at each other. And now I've become an American. Now I know how to yell. I know how to scream and say, no, that's wrong. You know? Why? Because I voted in this country for the first time as a former refugee to now become an American, and I cast my first vote in this country. So don't tell me America is not great. It is great, and it is much more powerful than one person who makes one particular pontification. My God, we are Americans, and we're full of gumption. So let's stay strong. Thank you.
So I'm very honored to be able to offer a few words of response, and then to maybe offer a question or two to open, and then we'll definitely take some questions from the audience. The great legal scholar Cass Sunstein has described the rule of law as a fight against arbitrariness, right? And I think that in some ways is the theme that runs through Derreck's keynote address for me. From the opening story, right, of the soldiers in the village, that is arbitrariness, right? It is not the rule of law. The examples, the points you made, I'm both old school and trying to be technologically savvy, which is a little difficult. Right, so legal instruments that judge people, right, that judges the intrinsic value of people based on race or any other characteristic, that is arbitrariness. And the legal instruments that are weak because not everyone has access, right? If not everyone has access, then the law is arbitrary, and that is not the rule of law. And that was also the thing that came to mind as I was beginning to think about these opening remarks over the weekend, or this response over the weekend. Derreck and I spoke for the first time about 3 weeks ago, 2 days before the inauguration. And so reflecting back on that conversation to prepare my response, it seemed a world away. It seemed like a different time. And in some ways it is, right? It is very different now than it was 3 weeks ago. And I think that we have to honor and respect that. And there is an element of arbitrariness to it, right? The executive orders, all three of them, not just the Muslim ban order, but the order that increases interior enforcement by increasing the number of enforcement officers and targeting communities. It has an element of arbitrariness to it. The wall along the southern border has has an element of arbitrariness to it. Neither of those things, to my mind, constitute the rule of law. And certainly the ban and the halt of the resettlement program are arbitrary actions. And so things are different than they were 3 weeks ago. But I think that it's also important for us to be able to do the famous thing that F. Scott Fitzgerald said in his essay, The Crack-Up, right? He wrote that the test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposing ideas in the mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function. So on the one hand, things are very different 3 weeks into the new administration after the executive orders, all of the executive orders on immigration. But in another way, things are very much the same. And to give an example of that, so one of the things that the third immigration order does is it reduces the refugee ceiling to 50,000, which is less than half, right, of what the Obama administration had planned for 2017. They had set the ceiling at 110,000. But the average number of refugees that were admitted to the United States between 2004 and 2015 was just shy of 60,000, right? The ceiling has been set low before. In the years after September 11th, the ceiling was 30,000 because of the fear that was generated by that event. The asylum grant rate in Atlanta, as many of you know, is abysmal, right? 2%. 2% of asylum seekers get asylum in Atlanta. So low that in a filing before the Inter-American Court on Human Rights, a group of attorneys working on a case about the Atlanta asylum courts called it an asylum-free zone, right? The grant rate is so low, there isn't really asylum in the Atlanta court, which is arbitrary. And so my point here is that things are very different now. They are also very much the same because there's a lot of structural forces that disadvantage immigrants and refugees in the American legal system, in the American governmental structure. And those structural forces can be played upon by administrations to make things better or make things worse. But so much of the power is given over to the executive. There are so few limitations available to the courts, though God bless the federal district judge in the Eastern District of Washington. But there is a great deal of arbitrariness that exists in the law surrounding migrant peoples of all forms. And so as we now respond, right, as thousands of people go into the streets, as thousands of attorneys go to the airport to defend people who are arriving, we need to remember that we're fighting not just these three executive orders, we're fighting the arbitrariness that judges people who are on the move as somehow less deserving of the full panoply of civil and human rights than those who are located somewhere, right? So those are my thoughts. That's what your keynote stirred up in me. And so one of the questions that I would sort of pose to you then is, from your perch, right, at the Center for Civil and Human Rights, looking at the history of the development of civil rights and human rights, the codification, creation of structures, how do you look out on this period of legal uncertainty and chaos that seems to be emerging, which I think a lot of people are responding to, all over the country, but also responding to in the various sessions from today's symposium?
So, one way to look at it is to panic and run nuts. And that's okay. It's okay to panic. But what is even much more important is that, for me, I see these opportunities where America is always asked the question, are you still alive? Are you still awake? Do you still know who you are? I think that's what this is happening. This is what is going on. Do we still believe in the precepts of what created this country? I run into people, especially younger people, who don't know who John Lewis is, for example. And when you see him in the news, I think that's an opportunity for you to know who he is and from where he stems from. And to actually question him and see whether he's actually right in this time around. Is he also current? So I see this particular move right now as a chance for us to make the union even stronger. And the way to do that is not to panic and then stay in a state of panic, but to then calm down after you panic and then just say, okay, what do we need to remind all of us what this is? And so to go back to the legal instruments and say, the law we agreed on, the statutes say this, and then let the legal sciences and arts forms codify it and remind us, say, you know what, you may have come up with a particular idea, but legally it's not going to pass. So if we pass that test, then we become stronger, don't you think? Because I think there's a little bit of complacency sometimes, you know? And we as human beings, when we get something and it's sort of taken for granted, you even forget it exists. You know, and I think sometimes Americans forget how beautiful they have it here. You know, you have legal instruments that protect you, and they're strong. But when you play around with them and don't exercise them in the manner that it's supposed to be exercised, then you become victims, or people around the world become victims of the complacency that we're worried about. So this is about the law, and I think the law is strong. It was well written. It's intact. The politicization of the law is always going to be reversed back, is my hope. But that can also be done by us being vigilant and saying, no, you cannot do that, period. And by the way, there's nobody above the law in the US. Nobody's above the law. I don't care who you are. Nobody is above the law. And that can only happen is if we make that what? True. You just don't walk away from your political affiliation and say, I'm going to say this and that. That's the law. No. No. And Nixon, I think, realized that. So if that's the case, then I'm confident we shall be fine.
Thank you. I'm going to try to pull together a couple of threads here for this second question, then we'll open it up to the floor. Yeah. So one of the sessions that we had this morning was dedicated to Middle Eastern migration to the Americas, both North and South America, in the late 1800s, early 1900s. I was noticing in one of the other sessions that someone was noting the presence of Filipino migrants in Louisiana in the 18th century. So this sort of reminder, right, that people have been moving from across the world to here, which I think is also a reminder to us that people are moving around the world all the time, right? I often think that the journey that a Mexican immigrant might make from northern Mexico to Texas is a lot shorter in distance than the journey I made from southwestern Missouri to Atlanta, right? So there's a kind of endemic movement to people, right? So we are all people on the move, or this is the way that I have begun to think about it. And I want to connect that to your thoughts about the marketplace through a tweet, actually, that the Georgia Tech Diversity, whoever's manning Georgia Tech Diversity's Twitter feed, posted this tweet. How do we shift the paradigm of, and this must be a quote from one of the sessions, refugees need our help, to refugees have a rich culture that contributes to our society, right? And part of, it seems to me, part of what shifts that paradigm is the recognition that refugees aren't in any significant way different from the rest of us. The line that we seem to draw there is that you people are moving. You're crossing borders. I don't move, right? Because I've been an American citizen and lived in the US all my life, except for those few times I studied abroad. Right? I don't move. So you and me, we're different because you're a refugee and you crossed a border and got a new citizenship. And I've never done that. But I've moved all over the place, and that seems part of the kind of human experience. So can we, to put it in the form of a question, I will ask our audience to do in a much more succinct way in a few minutes, can we understand the value
Yeah.
that refugees and other immigrants bring to the marketplace by understanding actually who we are, not necessarily who they are, or at least in tandem.
Yes, we can, and that's where the function of leadership comes in. Leaders are not supposed to be involved in sophistry, hoodwinking the people they lead, because that creates miscalculations and misunderstandings between people. Because all of us are very busy. We are accountants, we're doctors, and we are trusting you to be the leader. And when you come up and say something that is crazy, we're like, what? What happened? Who did what? So sophistry is not part of leadership because it creates dogma, bad dogma, and bad dogma then creates hatred and fear and all that stuff. So what I usually look at is, I do, as if somebody who has migrated from Uganda to Nairobi, I saw Kenyans actually fear Ugandans because Ugandans came with particular skill sets that Kenyans didn't have. So usually what most people are reacting to is the fear for, how am I going to compete with a Ugandan? How am I going to compete with a Kenyan? Where are you guys coming here? I don't understand your language. So what a leader does in that circumstance, which is what Angela Merkel was trying to do in Germany, was say, look, maybe we shouldn't fear them. Maybe we can say, hey, what skills are you bringing? And can we then use them to compete somewhere else? Because we already are doing that. Have you guys been to Silicon Valley before? If you haven't seen the most diverse part in the world, go to Silicon Valley. I mean, but the marketplace has embraced that because the leadership there is, the company is saying we need that kind of expertise to be in one place to think things out. So if we use it as examples to say, look, this is what seems to be foreign looks like when you actually domesticate it and bring it in and sort of work with it, that's what is lacking. So our leaders are playing into the lowest common denominator of our fear of the other. And here's my biggest problem. I remember a time where I had a friend who told me an interesting story. In South Africa, as a white child, you are told you're more superior than the black South Africans in class by being virtue of what? White. So when apartheid ended, that particular advantage, artificial advantage, was taken away. Now, can you imagine if you're the first white child to get an F and nobody has ever gotten an F in the white community? It was devastating for white folk in South Africa, white South Africans who no longer had the advantages to go on the street and beg. Can you imagine? South Africans had never seen a white South African beg. But once the advantage was taken away, it created more problems, not for the African South African, but for the white South African, to now say, sort of explain, why am I begging? Because actually, really, I'm a human being, and sometimes as human beings, we just don't have it. So artificial advantages are dangerous for society and the marketplace because they're telling people who don't have the skill set to compete that they're actually good. It's the same thing I tell my son who wants to play basketball. I say, Kevin, what is the biggest thing in basketball? He says, Daddy, you can't teach height in basketball. You can't. So if you can't teach height in basketball and somebody is 7 foot tall and you're 4 feet tall and you're going to play against him, something is going to be tough. Okay? Now we can put a ladder for you up there and sort of help you dunk on the person, but at some point the ladder is not going to be there. So leadership is important in this particular thing. Leaders cannot lie to the society they lead about advantages and who has what advantage. And therefore, if migration happens, and it will happen, whether you like it or not, it will happen. Just teach people how to compete against it fairly. Because if Pittsburgh needs to really move from being a coal mining city to now being one of the banking cities and that kind of thing, that's somebody who thought through it. Versus saying, you know what? We are not going to get rid of coal mining because everybody's a coal mining here. Coal mining stays. The marketplace from Philly is going to kill you. So how do you fight that? So that's what I'm trying to tell everybody. Diversity is here to stay. Domesticate it quickly, understand it quickly, and then use it to expand the marketplace because then we won't have to have artificial advantages, and therefore nobody's lying to the other person how good they are. Okay? If you suck, you really suck. And it's okay. Okay? And let's figure out how to help you. If you're really good, then let's work that out too. But this idea of creating artificial advantages in society really waters down competition, it waters down abilities, it makes people less able, and it doesn't really help the marketplace because it doesn't get us to the very next level. Compete in value, and compete in honesty, and let's do this the right way.
Thank you. So we've got maybe about 10 minutes for audience questions. As I said, don't exercise your moderator's privilege like I do. Keep your questions short and to the point. I believe there is a microphone to be circulated there in the back, so raise your hand.
And please be contrarian to where you need to be. Don't agree with everything we've said. Be tough.
My name is Jerome, and I just returned from the workshop which talk about immigration detention camps. In the workshop, it came to our highlight that it is also an industry. There is a marketplace there. There are corporations who want to control. It's a big scandal. So how do you see market about the market?
Very good. When the market gouges its own self, it eats itself. And that can also be talked about prisons as well. The industrial prison complex, I think, is notorious for that. So when these things happen, these imperfections happen, that's where civil society steps in. Civil society is, I think, the juxtaposition to the marketplace. It's what keeps the marketplace a little bit moral. Without civil society, then you don't have these checks and balances. So I usually tell people that when you see an irregularity in the heartbeat of the marketplace, then figure out a way to sort of correct it by starting your own 501c3 and sort of rallying people and educating people, doing research and creating the template to challenge that particular thing. And I see that happening right now in the marketplace with corporations that had carte blanche. They would go to Africa or Latin America and produce products in the most inhumane way possible and bring them here at a cheap price. And the unsuspecting consumer in the US who was not educated on how the product was produced said, wow, this is great. So it took Americans themselves who traveled like you did to go to Congo and see, oh my God, this is horrible. To go into the Middle East and see young kids making rags without going to school, to then come back and say, this, if you're consuming non-fair trade, as they call it sometimes, or if you're part of this corporation that is not, Americans are taking corporations to task, and there's nothing a corporation fears, nothing like a consumer who is educated about their product. And the person who can tell you that story very well is Ralph Nader. He challenges corporations to have moral aptitude all the time. And I think that the multi-faith community is the other place where we can challenge the moralness of these marketplaces, where we can talk about God himself not being an endorser of that particular behavior. You can say that. So that's where the volume of civil society can actually self-correct the marketplace. I love the marketplace. I love corporations. They create jobs. They create beautiful products. But in them, like with everything in terms of human institutions, we have people who are greedy, who then manage those corporations. People who don't understand diversity, who manage those corporations. Corporations really are not the problem. It's us who are actually creating these problems within these institutions because we are not brought up properly. We don't understand humanity. We've never served to actually empathize. We don't travel to understand diversity. Everything that is different from where we've stemmed from is fearful. So it is us that need to be corrected.
Just to add briefly, I think that it's worth recognizing that there's also a place for the law to limit the existence of an immoral marketplace, right? We don't allow people to be bought and sold anymore.
Yeah.
It's an immoral market. And profiting off of the deprivation of liberty is, in my opinion,
immoral.
an immoral market.
Yeah.
And so there is, I think, good reason for us to argue for the elimination of the private prison industry as an immoral market that should not be allowed to exist.
Absolutely.
So I have a question just, and this pertains really in an Israeli context. It's not, I think it can pertain to other places too. But in the state of Israel, part of the way that it destroyed Palestinian economy, Palestinian laborers inside the city of Israel. And then little by little, as the state wanted to make sure that it didn't have Palestinians in it, including the 7 to 8 million refugees, is that they actually have started to warehouse Palestinians so that the labor or that their use or value becomes nothing. So instead you can pocket them and imprison them, and then a new group can then be used as the labor force. So I'm just wondering how this plays into it, and that means foreign workers from Nigeria and the Philippines and all over the world were brought to take those places, and then African asylum seekers who have no rights whatsoever are now used as a population of labor, but not protected at all. So and also put in detention centers. So I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that in relation to what you're offering.
So, without being emotionally charged about that issue, I can tell you that one of the systems that we construct after we face our own oppression is we forget how horrible that oppression was. And I think that in these situations, be it Israel or in Sudan, South Sudan, where you've seen a lot of problems with this, or in any other country where we've had problems where people have been mismanaged or taken advantage of, usually it's because we're not articulating with vigor these particular problems. And we fear to be politically punished for saying and constructing highways outside of that particular problem. We are seeing that in UAE. Ugandan girls go to UAE to work, and they're captured and they're raped and they're beaten, and nobody's doing anything about it because Uganda depends very heavily on the UAE economy. And so what happens in the marketplace is that if it's so powerful that human dignity is irrelevant, then we have a problem. Meaning that if you're so wealthy or you're so privileged that the scandalous behavior of the state is not respecting of the dignity of a human being, be whoever that person is, then the state has to become immoral. And when the state becomes immoral, who questions the state without being questioning of the people of the state? Because usually that's what happens. When you question a state's policy, people then say, you're questioning my Ugandanness. No, we're not questioning you as a Ugandan or a Muganda. We're questioning the policy of the state. And so if we can do that, then we can't say, as I tell my people back at home in Uganda, not every American is a disaster. Okay? Yes, you're seeing it on CNN and everybody's like, oh, Americans, oh my God, what are they doing? No, it doesn't happen like that. If the state is complicit, it's the state that is complicit. And you call it for that. But we disable these big entities like the UN that are supposed to call into question the state's practice and call it into a moral global aptitude, and they're disempowered. They're toothless. So as we make the UN toothless, as we make these global institutions that are supposed to keep all of us together toothless, then states get away with complicity. And when state gets away with complicity, then the local grassroots community that is forcing the state to become immoral becomes empowered. I mean, for the first time in the last 30 years, we're seeing more swastikas in Europe than we've ever seen. I mean, that's because states are being forced by the grassroots community, which is ill-educated and prepared, and they're forcing the politicians to then make the state policy, and the state becomes complicit. So it starts in the grassroots community. Our communities need to be educated and really reminded how dangerous those things can be, because they trickle up to the state level and they become policy, and then the state becomes immoral. So that's what I think we need to do, is in Israel, in Nigeria, everywhere, go back to the grassroots and change the makeup of how people think and determine policy. Because they elect people who then become the representatives of the state, and then the state becomes this whole thing that we're all scared of.
There's one behind you.
So, rule of law and the fight against arbitrariness seems to necessitate a high bar for acknowledging case-by-case particularity of people on the move.
Mm-hmm.
But there seems to also be, especially in the realms of policy and law and institutions, this value of bureaucratic utility. And these come into tension with one another. Can you give any guidance on how we could think about negotiating that tension between bureaucratic utility, making decisions at a bureaucratic level, and acknowledging case-by-case particularity and upholding rule of law, fighting against arbitrariness?
Boy, that's your question.
So I think that in a world marked by the development of civil and human rights, we always err on the side of due process for all individuals. So the bureaucracy does not get to the privileging of bureaucracy. And bureaucracy has its benefits, efficiency has its benefits. But the privileging of efficiency and bureaucracy does not get to shortchange necessary and fundamental due process. So yes, there is a tension there, but I think in the negotiation of that tension, there is always, or should be, an inevitable winner, which is that there are fundamental due process norms which should be followed in the adjudication of the individual case.
Hi.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you guys both for doing. I'll stand. Thank you guys both for your comments, just the perspectives that you guys both bring. My question is: we talked about the unskilled migrants who move, and how much it stinks. But then we've also talked about welcoming those who are immigrants and those uneducated welcomers. How do we, as people in this room, become those grassroots that you talk about? What methods are already in place that we can utilize? And how do we become the force that changes things that we see as corrupt back to good?
So that's a good question. The way civil society works in the U.S., as I've found it to be, which is always a proud moment for me, is that you have people like yourself that are seeing these nuances in society and that need to be corrected. And then you have people who have the resources to then help fund the investigation of that particular nuance. And once that is done, then it's easy to then go and organize around that particular problem or that particular nuance, and then to sort of challenge the community to be involved and engaged. The fear right now, especially among millennials, is that when I saw, for example, Black Lives Matter, there was a question, what are they doing? And how horrible they were. And I was really surprised at the US in that particular regard, because most of them are young kids. And nobody actually said, okay, we know what you're trying to say. Okay, come on. Let's help you guys sort of articulate this. Rather, what I saw was people abusing these kids and calling them names, and they're stupid and they're that because they lost their way. And it's okay. It reminded me of how my son started to crawl and walk. And the first day he stood up to walk, I didn't say, you bloody idiot. You can't walk? I didn't say that. Oh, Kevin, oh, okay, come on. And you'd take 2 steps and you'd fall. And I think that neighborliness, where the adults, rather than critiquing a young motion and teaching and educating and instructing, is what I'm worried about. We're losing that particular ability. Don't critique the young for articulating something that they really feel passionate about and going it the wrong way. Just help them out. So that's where my fear is. But the resources are here. The concerns are here. The millennials are really plugged in more than any time, I think. And the last thing we need to do is say, you suck. you really suck at organizing. You really suck at articulating your motto. No, let's work. So I'm looking for somebody who can actually help us teach and instruct millennials on how to do this. And that's what the Center for Civil and Human Rights is doing. We're walking these kids through the building, and we show them how the March on Washington was built. There was organization, people did plaques, there was people who were organizing food, somebody organized the program. It didn't just walk up and say, oh, I have a dream. No, he did start off that way. That thing came later on because a lot of work was done. So that's what needs to be done. We need to teach people how to organize and organize with gumption, and to teach people to learn how to sacrifice. You know, most of you think that peace comes by peaceful means sometimes. No, it doesn't. People die for peace. People die for to be a refugee is not easy. It's not easy. To be oppressed is not easy. And we rely on you guys to really understand that. And go out there and be organized, because the enemy is organized. Don't come to the marketplace with poor skills to fight poverty. Poverty is a big deal. It's robust, it's a strong enemy. If you come with your poor skill sets to organize a march, we're going to be disorganized and we're going to look idiotic. Represent us well. Learn your artifacts, your art craft to fight these social injustices. So don't critique young people when they try to say something. Help them out.
I had two quick things to that. Just two relatively short things. The first is get to know as many people in this room as possible. There are amazing organizing resources in this room, right? There are great organizations, there are great allies. There are people who will teach you how to be effective, right? You couldn't attend all 8 of the workshops today, but you can get to know the people who led those workshops. So take advantage of the resources that are around you. And the second thing is get to know communities of refugees, of immigrants, and stand beside those communities as they stand up to say, we deserve not to be treated arbitrarily, right? Because that's what it's going to take. The communities themselves have to stand up and say, you can't treat us in an arbitrary way. And I'll take a slightly different perspective on the Black Lives Matter movement, which is that the Black Lives Matter movement, in the era of the first Black president, stood up and said, Black life is still being devalued, and we're not going to let it happen anymore, right? Look at us, we matter, and we're gonna be in these streets until you make good on the promise that Dr. King tried to make you make good on 40 years ago, right? And the same thing is going to have to be true for immigrant and refugee communities in order for us to fight back against this pattern of arbitrariness.